Greetings, glad to have you with us. This is Content Evolution NuWorld from Research Triangle Park, where I am, and Mike McGuire's out in Silicon Valley. We're delighted to have you with us. And
good day,
Mike. I am having a delightful day, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation here about interaction and what I've been observing about voice assistants. You lit up when I talked about this as a topic earlier in the week. Are you
I did.
Still jazzed?
Yeah, I think I'll be interested to see where this goes. This was one of those areas that I kind of spent some time tracking for years, particularly around chatbots and things like that, which I consider kind of a related area. So, yeah, I'm very interested to hear what the group will come forward on this.
I just want to tell, because we made a policy decision as we started to record today. We have a Robert's note taker. It's a bot that is in here, and we need to know who you are, Robert, to allow you to record and join these calls. So I'm going to remove you from the call now. If you want to reach out to us or make yourself better known, we would be glad to have you join us. Okay, so here we go. Okay, I have submitted a report, and there we are. Okay, so now we are on to our topic, and delighted to have you with us. I want to just share a book that was written by a gentleman. I used to work with the California College of the Arts with their design MBA program and curriculum. At the time, the dean of that program was Nathan Shedroff. Good guy. He wrote several books. The one that's relevant to our conversation today is he wrote a book called Make It So. He took that phrase from the Jean-Luc Picard character on Star Trek to talk about the things that we have been introduced to via science fiction and literature that later actually become innovations that are in our lives. And the one that is relevant here is if you've watched Star Trek or any science fiction, people regularly converse with the computer, right, on the spaceship, right? Hey, how many parsecs are we away from Altair 6 or whatever it is that they're trying to find out, and the computer tells you. Well, we have adopted our voice assistants in our homes and on our phones and everything else. However, my observation is they're not used at all inside of the workplace or in the enterprise, right? They are noticeably absent, right? And my observation is twofold. One, from a cultural point of view, there seems to be a barrier about trusting the thing in a business environment, right? Who's listening? Where is that information going? And probably the second issue is it's not actually connected to any of the information inside the enterprise that I give a damn about, right? So it can't actually answer any of the questions I want answered because it's not connected. I would like to know, how many widgets did we sell in Brazil last month, right? And since it's not connected to that information, it can't answer the question. So it's, I don't trust it, and it doesn't have knowledge about the things that I might want to ask about in a business context. So, Mike, what do you think about my hypothesis?
Well, I think that I agree to a degree. No, right. In general, I think that last point you made about it's not connected. I think actually one of the bigger challenges, what's behind that, it's not connected to the data that I would find useful, is I don't think it's a matter of integrating or connecting so much as has the enterprise actually been rigorous enough in the past, or in the past, to have a really good uh, taxonomy and tagging and metadata tagging practice within the company for that data that is the operational data of a company, whether that's for security or other reasons. I just don't think, to your point, that there is enough structure to the information that most enterprises have. They have the structure that's necessary to move bits around, but to be able to have that kind of ability to tag and identify information so that a simple command, how many widgets did we sell in Brazil last quarter versus year ago quarter, et cetera, comparative quarter, may not just simply, that may have been tagged for other purposes, but not so much as it is in the corpus of data that you would have, where again, those kind of conversational or non-specific, just kind of random words or that you and I might use to describe something. I think it's just a matter of the agents aren't able to, the data's not tagged well enough
Okay, so
to make that useful.
there's a data lake organization, ability to access, right, issue. But we seem to be willing to let the AI in, right? We're willing to do it on the keyboard, right? So there's something about talking to the machine. There's a human interaction, right, issue here, because we're organizing a corpus of data to be able to do that inside the enterprise. We're letting that in because we're doing it with keystrokes on a screen instead of talking to it.
And I think a lot of companies invested in AI to do what I was talking, to do the tagging, right? To crawl all the data if they had a structure, presumably most big enterprises had some sort of a schema, right? To link what the data is as it exists in the system and how it is rendered so that a human can see it. I think that was what a lot of the early investments in enterprises and AI was used to just kind of go out and do that simple organization and tagging. Probably more in the financial industry first, but I think we're letting the AI in, but again, hopefully, to make these tools useful or these voice assistants useful, said you have to done that structuring and tagging exercise earlier. I don't, because one could argue, I think I was curious, Kevin, are you headed in that direction? It's like, if we're letting the AI in to do this, I should be able to converse. But I think again, we may have also a practical problem with the tagging. But I wonder, I bring up the old joke. It's like, I could talk to it like we do on Star Trek, et cetera. But since when have, these become an evolutionary hindrance, right? I mean, if I can just type it fast enough, to get, what we don't have is the interface that lets me do that, right? Even with the keyboard is there an open screen somewhere where I just say, okay, how many widgets did we sell in Brazil? Quarter on quarter.
I was working with a guy, he's moved into a banking assignment, but he was a general, ergonomics and human factors engineer, and was exploring in smart environments gesture recognition, that you would be able to apply something like American Sign Language, that you would be able to do something with your hand and the environment would be able to respond. So no keyboard, no voice, right? It was observing what you were doing and maybe give me a Coke. I don't know sign language. My wife does, right? She worked in a daycare where she had some, young people who did not have the ability to hear. So she learned, some sign language to communicate with them. It's interesting. And by the way, I didn't recognize this when I went to a conference this summer. There was a professor from South Africa that was talking about the sign language that is prevalent in Africa, right? And it's different. It evolved in a different way, still there, completely functional, but came up and so people who speak American Sign Language and people who are doing cannot communicate with each other, right? Because it's different language. Tower of Babel. So Ben, I see some comments in from you. Join us. What are you thinking? And we'll get everybody in a minute, but you type first, so.
I put in several items that just run through really quick. That missing in most of the LLMs is semantics and ontologies that that lead us to these kinds of behaviors, and so we're not talking to creatures that are conscious of the discipline of the environment or culture, enterprise, or whatever it might be, but they're based on engines that are trained for prediction. And prediction by its nature is statistical, and therefore we act surprised when things hallucinate. And because we aspire to the brain. And the problem with that is the brain doesn't act in the discipline that we like sometimes. You dream at night, you hallucinate at night, you create and predict at night in your dreams. But that's not the way you want necessarily a business to operate, or the life control elements in a spaceship as well.
Yeah.
I have a quick thing. I have a theremin that I used to use many, many years ago to convince students that you could read gestures. And and now it's accepted, but it was a long time before people could think you could read gestures and interpret them semantically.
Yeah.
I tried to play a theremin, and I clearly do not have the right right hand control, because the loop that controls the volume and the one that controls pitch is I was not doing it the right way. So go ahead,
but
Mike.
just one quick thing. I put it out and let the students play with it in a break, and one young lady who had never approached a theremin before, after about 15 or 20 minutes, got into Mary Had a Little Lamb. It was sort of just intuitive for her. That was freaky, because after XD years, I can't do it.
There you go.
Well, no, I think, that whole thing of, Kevin, that we started out with gestures. I mean, that was something you and I talked about a couple of years ago, and that, do you recall, I incorporated that into a deck at some point, or that I did at Gartner that got some, but I think, if we're back to the void, got some interest, but it was too far out. Most people just wanted me to tell them, like, okay, what do I do in the next 6 months with my mobile marketing or digital marketing program? Not so much, I don't care, I'll adapt to whatever those crazy consumers end up using in the future. But I think when we think about that, is we're getting back to the notion of voice. I mean, I also just wonder if it's I think some of the resistance is it's cultural, as you move back into the kind of workplace culture that's more open. Seating kind of precludes, or doesn't preclude, it makes it harder, right, to just have ongoing call and response with a device. I mean, unless you're using headphones, I think that, there's something there. Forrester and others, will say that they expect to see more than 20 million of these devices in enterprises in 3 years or in 2 years, which I think is okay. I'm still figuring out why I need the separate device. If I have this is all code anyhow. Why is this not just an application on my desktop or my laptop, or the same one on my phone?
Yeah,
right?
I think that's rational. Although we see, Amazon cutting back on the staff that's programming in this space, because they haven't. I think that what they thought was this was going to be the voice buy button, right?
Yeah.
And that
give me
people
another
are using
Reese's
it
peanut
for,
butter cup. Yeah.
Yeah, and I never use it for that. All right. What time is it? And I play look up something on Wikipedia. Those are the ways that I use it. All right. I don't use it as a buying system. And if it isn't directly tied to how they make money, I think that they're, a little recalcitrant. I've always thought that it should show up in places like a retail store, right? Like if I went to a grocery store and there were places near the end caps, where, when I turned the corner with my cart and I said, where are the eggs, in the store, that it would say, oh, that's aisle 1, all right, halfway down, or whatever. That if it had the planogram of the store, that it could tell me, where to go next, all right. Same would be true for a Home Depot or anything that had, considered offerings, right, more than, one thing and less staff than it used to have. That would be a good application from my point of view. Okay.
No, but I think that's, I think when we think about that, as I said, the workplace culture, I think is one that makes it difficult, but harder. But I would say, I think, especially as AI has kind of spreading throughout teams and organizations in particular, it's not affecting every business unit at the same, equally. There are, I can think of, a lot of applications where particularly, outside of customer support, which is where we've seen most of those implementations, as AI has, and generative AI in particular, that ability to just, have constant voice commands saying summarize last 2, or, can you go find Jim's, report on this topic from last week and, put on screen to the group or mail to the group. I think, when we, as generative AI spreads, that ability to have my voice to, as we've all found, create pretty amazing pieces of work, starts to get more interesting. Matt, go ahead. You had your hand up.
And I think you're hitting on a lot of the truths behind just the ergonomics of the environment. The open plans are loud. The headphones don't work well. The voice receiver doesn't always understand what you are saying, especially in both ethnic and regional accents. But I think that there's an issue we hadn't hit on yet, which is data is political. And the control of the data and how the data is defined tends to change from executive to executive.
Yep.
So opening the data up more may not be in the self-interest of political players within a corporation, regardless of whether it's voice or whatever, because they want to discuss what is and isn't included in the numbers. The political nature of data, not just the security of data, is one of the limiters in this space.
Mac, that's your next book right there.
Yeah.
That's that thesis. You need to write that down. Political data.
I remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that is, 12 chapters, okay, of insights for sure. Doug, I saw you in chat, and I saw Jim Spoor in there too, but I think you posted several things, Doug, and you're on camera. So
yeah, hi. Yeah, so a comment about hallucination. I'm working on a presentation, hallucination in healthcare, going from medical Googling to medical AI self-diagnosis, self-treatment. Thinking about hallucination, right? Does hallucination, happen because we train on the human experience, right? And how often do humans hallucinate, right? Is a politician telling you what you want to hear? Is a salesperson or marketing person tells you what you want to hear to encourage you, get you to buy something, right? News bias to keep you engaged, right? To make you angry. How much of the human experience is hallucination, right? An advertisement.
Okay, so I just want to make a distinction here for a second. I think that when something hallucinates, it is the sender that's hallucinating, right? If it's done on purpose, right, they're trying to be persuasive, right, as a sender to the receiver, right? And if it's both, right, that you're hallucinating and it becomes persuasive, and it's a machine, well, okay, that's a, that's a societal problem.
Well, so Bing is a good example, right? You have creative, moderate, and then precise, right? Is your choice.
Right.
So like I was asking, I forget what I was asking it about, and I had it on the creative and I wanted precise. And so it gave me a whole bunch of, information that, followed the prompt, but it was clearly wrong, right? It was fiction,
Right.
right? So is it fiction? And then when I switched it over to be precise, it gave me the right information. So, how much of, like when AI is trained on books, there's fiction and nonfiction, right?
Sure.
So, from a human perspective, do we know what we're saying is false, right? Or is it known falsehood? Is it we don't know it's a falsehood, but we're saying it, or we don't know it's a falsehood, but it's still false, right?
But
The
even
known
if it reads
known-
fiction, right, and
But-
you're asking it a question, is it authentic to what Tolstoy wrote in War and Peace, or is it something else, right? Because there is that level of authenticity in the data too, right?
Right. And but even the AI, if it gives you, if you give the prompt and it gives you some data, if you ask the question, are you sure this is right? It will actually
They'll
say,
oh, of course.
or if you say no, actually it may correct itself, self-correcting, right? Like a teacher, when a kid's giving an answer and they're giving a wrong answer, you can ask, you can either tell them, well, it's wrong, or you can say, are you sure it's right? Or you can give them, like some clues to help them get the right answer. In fact,
You've got to distinguish what's in the corpus, the veracity of what's in the corpus versus what's presented forward. The prediction model works on whatever it's got. If you put false things in there, or if you feed loops of hallucinations back in, which is a part of our current crime, we're going to amplify it. But you need to separate the corpus, the integrity of the corpus versus the generation activity.
Right, and that's what they're really focusing on, is the training data. Are we training it on factual information, like for instance, MedPalm by Google? They're training it on factual data. And the problem with medical information is it may be factual, correct. This is the standard practices in 2020 too, or 2021, but then
in 1200 we didn't think that way.
Yeah, in fact, there was a recent study that did that. They talked about hallucination, but the AI was giving factual information for that was the standard practice in 2021, but not in 2022. It had changed. Now, my question is if they asked this was on cancer treatments, if they asked an oncologist, would they be able, they may say, okay, unless they read the report that said this is now the change in the standard treatment, did they get the updated information as well? Right. So is it a hallucination, or is it, based on the training data? But anyway, bottom line is the training data. Going back to healthcare, it's because that's a $4 trillion business going to $6 trillion in the next few years. More and more people are going to be doing self-treatment, or first of all, self-diagnosis. Already, like 30% of people, the first thing you do is go to Google and say, or what's going on. And now with AI, you can get very specific responses, like you're talking to a nurse, right? If you ask it for a nurse treatment plan, you can get very good information. But I think of the saying, a lawyer or a person who represents himself as has a fool for a client, right? That's the old saying, right? Even if you're a lawyer, you don't represent yourself because you're not objective. And so I think of a person who self-treats himself without the right information has a fool for a patient, right? So, as we have the opportunity to be self-diagnosing and then self-treating, when do we say, okay, yeah, is okay? In fact, can I share my screen? I just want to share one picture real quick. If you can turn on sharing. If not, that's fine. But I have a picture of one of the questions I asked is give me a list of medical errors that they had. and one of them was performing self-surgery. So that is, it's like, you know, I asked Bard, you know, top medical self-treatment errors to avoid, and one was self-surgery. And so I created I used Bard, or no, excuse me, Image Create. So it was Dolly, and
Right.
it gave me a nice picture of someone doing self-surgery.
Well, there are a few documented cases in history. I think, what was it, Amundsen's, a couple of the Arctic and Antarctic explorers had to do that. And precious few followers, actually, out of it. But well, Doug, that's, as we get kind of what Mac was saying around kind of the politics of data and information, and you kind of how do we manage this, the constant, and it will never change. I think we all know, there will be, as Jim pointed out, there'll be bad actors who try to influence data sets, et cetera, and maybe not even influence the data by changing it themselves, but simply having enough skills to simply say, I can now execute, I'm just going to throw this operational command in here to randomly alter things over time, which I think somebody was talking to me about that the other day, the longitudinal risk. But when we think about medical data and any other kind of enterprise data, I often hear people talk about, well, we just need more, we need to do a better job at enterprises of in data literacy, right? And understanding rules and regulations and things like that. Is that something you see? I mean, other than what we see with HIPAA and things like that, I know you've looked a lot at the healthcare industry. Is there both kind of the educate? It seems to me like what you're describing is, how do I put a tool around this, or a guardrail, a set of instructions so that people can't break it? Is there hope or do you see that the industry kind of looking at how do we improve or enhance how our employees, workers, those who access these systems treat the data? Or am I now just kind of being too naive?
Yeah, so one thing, in fact, I just put in the link, lifearchitect.ai, what's in my AI. So, it's like, what's being trained, right? So there's the training data, and that's going to be needing to be more refined, because especially, like, you don't want to try, just in general, if you're training it on things that cause you to break policy and get fines, like copyright and so forth. So there's that issue. So anyway, these large language models, what you do to train it, and train it specifically on valid data, right?
Right.
And then the other thing is, once the large language model is trained, there's something called constitutional AI, which is, okay, I get a result, right, from this large language model. And again, it's a creation, right? Now you try to make it precise. And in fact, Bard, supposedly Google said they're going to have a list and show what they think is more accurate, and can they reference from like, okay, I gave you this fact, and this, like Bing says, this is where I got that information, so it can vet the information. So it even talked about showing the result in green, which is, I'm very confident this is accurate. Yellow, which is I'm not so confident. Red is like, okay, I got it from the internet, but you
triangulate yourself.
Though at least when I was playing around with it, I was traveling last week, so I haven't played with it in the last 2 weeks, but I couldn't get it to do that. So I don't know if anyone else has from that. I
have, Doug. It's been fairly consistent. I wouldn't say I have tons of swings or at bats with it, but in the last, I noticed that it was about 10 days ago or something like that, they kind of rolled that out. It's been pretty good. I mean, it's very clear, because as an old reporter, my first thing is, okay, everything in green, I'm going to go double check this, or triple check it. And it was remarkably accurate. It will almost always default to that, whatever, not quite ochre, but yellow, whatever. It's a weird color they picked. That's fairly kind of like the default response when it's, can't find anything. It's like, well, double check. This sounds good, but I don't know if it exists. And I've been bouncing back and forth between those, taking those sections. And then if you throw that in Word, if you use the new versions of Office 360 Word and Office 365, the editor will go out and look for are there similar, is this been phrased in a similar way? Right. So you can kind of go, I don't know that most people would do that kind of triangulation, but it is getting fairly good at saying, I've got this double sourced this way, this one I'm not sure about, and it's so far, but again, I'm limited by what I know, right, as far as whether that's actually correct or not. And I think, I did have a moment this weekend where I was thinking this was my Black Mirror moment, right? Was, okay, I verified this, and this, and I found this old textbook that, okay, verified that. Then there are these two other elements, like I couldn't find any information, but it sure sounded good.
Yeah.
And it correlated with my argument. It fit in real nicely with this piece I was working on. I was like, well, I don't know.
Well,
What am
that's
I
the
going to do with that?
danger I mean, AI at its, just like a politician, it will tell you what you want to hear, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you put a prompt in, it will tell you what you want to hear, and it may be very polite and say, okay, I'm going to give you echo what you want, as opposed to here is what I believe is the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the dilemma. The AI, large language models are trained to give you what you want to hear. So is it you hallucinate? I mean, is the AI hallucinating, or is it just echoing back the hallucination
Right.
of what you're asking for? Right. This is the
Or
danger.
or just going to find that random data point that kind of more or less, confirms the bias or the thesis you're working on, but I'm not sure it's actually, is it in context, etc. Which is, a nuance we're kind of used to, right? Is being able to, in a lot of our work, right, being able to always place a concept in context, right, of what's going on in the larger world, um, or around that particular topic. And I think that's one thing I've, hadn't thought about till we were just started a little earlier, Doug, was that thought really does kind of, the more and more, it bothers me more than anything, right? Is that at some point, I guess we could always say with politicians, truth is always illusory, but now we're, are we really going to start questioning our own internal business units more than we did before, or our co-workers? Is that actually accurate? I mean, how can he say that? How does she say that?
Yeah.
Where does that come from? And I think that could be good because it forces more rigor up maybe on talking about a subject. But is it that, it's like the early days of web search, of Google search, right? That's really cool. I got all these results back. How many of those are actually like close to even what I'm looking for?
Well, I think
Um,
Stephen Kotler said that you should, whenever you're trying to research a topic, look at 4 different experts, and
mhm.
if they all agree, try to find an expert that disagrees, right? And get a different perspective, right? And maybe when you get 100 people, I mean, I think there's this famous case where 100 German scientists was Nazi in Nazi Germany were saying why Einstein was wrong, and Einstein's response was, if I'm wrong, all it takes is one scientist. And so sometimes when everyone's saying one thing, echoing the information, even if they're experts, they may be wrong, right? So this is the danger. So what is truth? I mean, the question that's been asked, through the millennials, and how do you vet information as well is the challenge.
Right. And I think that, but what Mac was saying earlier, right, about the politics of data and information, um, those old mindsets, right, are always going to be continually using that, right, as the cudgel or the justification to keep their control over the data. I mean, it was interesting, Kevin, you and I were using that example of how many widgets did we sell last quarter? I was like, I was in that business for 40 years. It's like I never would have got that anyhow, except at quarter end or year end when the CEO had to actually sit down and attest to the numbers of the company. Is that available more quickly now through some of these interfaces? Sure. Am I going to be able to get to it? Probably not. And I
Let me
mean,
tell you
to some
something.
degree, access control stuff that already exists probably would be, a way to manage that. But here again, that just kind of, I would think, reinforces all the old control points.
Yeah, but I had access to
You
all
did,
the
sure.
data that would eventually drive executive compensation inside of my, CSAT and some other metrics. And so I had all that available. And, Mac is right. The number of people who had access to the entire picture was very limited, right? For some, good reasons, right? But at any rate, did you see, Mike? I'm back. Did you see Mark and Mac have their hands up?
I did not. I apologize. I
That's
had
all right.
multiple screens.
I think Mark was probably first.
He was.
So, hello, Mark Prensky.
Well, good morning, everybody. Sorry I got up a little bit late this morning. Lovely to be here. So I have a couple of things that I'm going to just share that I've observed listening to this. The first one was when Mac talked about data has politics. Data also has purpose, interestingly enough. And I thought about video games. So when you have a simulation, not so much video games, but simulation, when you have a game simulation of war,
Yeah.
and this goes way back, and a tank cannon can only really in real life fire only every 5 minutes because it has to cool down a certain amount. But in the game, that would be the death of the game. So a tank can fire continuously, and so both of those are data. One of them is data from the real world, and the other is data from the simulation. Those data were created for the same tank in service of two different purposes. And it's the same thing if in a company, if your purpose of creating your data is to defraud, like Mr. You-know-who, that's different data than the data that's not created to defraud. So that was one thing, which all relates to cause and effect and how you can figure that out. Give them what you want to hear. I think Doug just said that. Give them what they want to hear. That's what kids do, right? When they grow up, that's that's the goody kid, the kid who is raised by some standards, who provides exactly the answers that the elders are looking for, which brings me back to the fact that we're talking about not even a toddler. We're talking about a less than 1-year-old here. So imagine if you were trying to predict adults from 1-year-olds. That's all you had was 1-year-olds, and you could observe them and you could see what they do. And then your goal was to predict adult behavior. We're in a sense trying to predict the behavior 20 years from now of these things, of AI, of all these kind of things, with all we can see is the infant. And it's really interesting because I don't know if any of you are, but I'm by chance in a group like this that has Deepak Chopra and a whole bunch of other things, and they're all arguing first-person data, third-person data. Is anyone else in that group? It's crazy to try to figure out essentially how you measure whether there's other forces than what science talks about and what ESP talks about. I think that's the gist of their conversation, and they are really so at cross purpose. It's really strange to see this kind of thing because it brings me right back into Thomas Kuhn. They're just seeing the world from such different perspectives, and those things he said were cross purposes. They would never understand each other, and the only truth that counts, there is no truth, he says, it is what is most useful. And so what perspective is useful, what paradigm is useful for us to take on this kind of thing at this moment in time with everything that we know, is a real interesting question. And Trump's answer to that is not the same as Biden's answer to that, and et cetera, et cetera. So thank you. This caused a lot of thought in my mind. Did anybody get my paper that I wrote the other day? I don't know, I sent it out, I think.
I
to
did.
the
I already responded to you that I've received it.
Oh,
Thank you
good.
for sharing.
Okay. Well, I hope it's of interest to somebody. I'm not gonna, we don't need to talk about it. Thank you.
Well, I mean, if you'd like to put it in chat so that those who didn't receive it, right, just put it in there and people can get the link. I think you published on LinkedIn Pulse, right?
I published on LinkedIn something, so yes. So,
Yeah, it's just, I think it's called Pulse is the one, it's an article. Mac Turner, your hand is up.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Kevin.
Mark.
Real quick, Doug, if you haven't read this relative to your healthcare work, abductive inference models for diagnostic problem solving, it might help. One of its major, just really simplified tenets is a lot of the computer algorithms intended to diagnose disease work as long as you only have one disease. But when you start adding diseases and the symptoms get interrelated to each other, the models tend to break down. So just a thought that this might help in the direction you're going.
So is that symbolic computation? Is that what that says?
Yes, along with abductive models as opposed to inductive and deductive models.
Okay. What can you put the link to that into chat, please?
I do that right now.
Okay. Having read the book, what is the linkage between what the author is or authors are suggesting and symbolic logic?
I think where the authors are trying to go is that at the moment they feel there is extreme, well, the conclusion would be to our conversation that we are saying, hey, we are moving towards self-diagnostics and self-care. And that the technology and the models, the symbolic logic just isn't there to support complicated diagnostic and treatment approaches.
Okay.
And I will put that in.
And abductive there is the third body between like Sherlock Holmes was, it's inductive, or what was the other one?
It's inductive, deductive, and
Deductive, right? So Sherlock Holmes was deductive, right?
well, he says he's deductive, but actually the method he follows is more inductive. But abductive it sounds more quantum in the sense of we're going to consider literally all possibilities. And then we're going to assign probabilities to those possibilities.
But it also, in my understanding of abductive, is it also assumes where you have no data, right? That there are missing data sets. So it makes inferences about what the missing data sets might be.
Yes, it can do
Okay.
that.
So anyway, so that no logical syllogisms in that world. Okay. So Jim, join us. You've posted several things in here. We haven't heard your voice yet.
I'm having too much fun listening. I'll just
Good.
say that. Mark, I liked your article very much, and it was concise and clear. The pictures I liked at the top too of the that was really, there was a whole story in that, I'm sure. But Tuesday I was at Andreessen Horowitz. I got invited up to give an AI talk, and before I spoke, their lead AI guy at Andreessen Horowitz spoke, Guido Appenzeller, and I just wish you had been in the room when he showed his daughter. And I haven't been able to find these slides out there yet. And he hasn't connected with me on LinkedIn yet, so I can't specifically ask him how he feels about it. But he had a picture of his daughter. I think she's maybe 8 years old. And she used 4 tools to create a digital twin of herself and her digital twin kind of looks like a Disney character. And she gave her report on AI to her class with her digital twin. which I guess some of the students in her class speak Spanish and Chinese. So she had portions of her digital twin speak to them in Spanish and Chinese. And she said, now the real me can't do that, but my digital twin can. It's got capabilities that I don't have, that I don't fully understand. But I just, when I saw that, I thought so much of you, Mark, and the great work you're doing. And anyway, I guess you joined a little late, so I'll put Guido's link back in here. Again, I don't have really much contact with him, but I'll send that. And if I do have permission to share my screen, I will show you one picture that Bing Image created that I'm pretty proud of. Yeah.
There you
All
go.
right, that's all I have. I'll go back to listen mode because I'm having fun
If you want
listening.
to share your screen, you can now.
Oh, cool. Okay, let me share
And
my
by the
screen.
way, Appenzeller in Switzerland is a digestive. You know, it's like a liquor after dinner. So
Yeah.
You know, your AI guy on Sand Hill Road is a digestive, right?
Yeah, well, it turns out Andreessen Horowitz has an office at Sand Hill Road. I've been there many times, but they now have an office up in San Francisco, right by the train station.
Okay. Didn't know that.
And very, very friendly people there. I made a lot of friends hanging out a day at there. But this, I'm quite proud of this. I just said to Bing Image when it came out, like what, 3 days ago or something, please create an image of this library that has a monkey at the typewriter and a stochastic parrot dictating to the monkey. And it came back with this and several others that I thought were pretty good too. But I just love this. I love the expression on the monkey's face, and I loved how, I guess, the stochastic parrot, it created these little like neural links, and you can see kind of little things in there. Just beautiful, I thought.
Oh,
and then
this is fantastic.
And it says, please create. The first two things on the page are please create. Then you can't really read the rest, but I just thought, you know, showing this prompt.
Could you do a share?
Sure. What do you mean?
Well, it says share, the link to share it. I'd be interested in getting that. Or if you can just copy and paste the picture in the chat. Though I don't know if you have that.
I put a link to my, I'll stop sharing. I put a link to the whole presentation that has that in it and several other interesting things in the chat above. So let me just redo that, and you should be able to get it out of there. And if you want a high resolution version or anything, I'm happy to send you that, of course.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I can just react to that for a second. Thanks, Jim. That I wish I were there too. But when I think the change that's coming is when the daughter said, the real me can't do this. And the answer is, the way I look at it is, yes, the real you can do it because it just did it. And because so looking at these things as outside of ourselves is not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is they are human capabilities. This girl just is using more advanced human capabilities, but it's not the real me versus the fake me. It's me. There's only one me. Well,
you know, the bad actors are starting to clone people. So, you know, for their own purposes. So, you know, and some famous people have said, anybody clone me that you want, but you got to give me 10% of anything you make with my clone.
Correct.
So there's this whole spectrum. I think there's a lot of honesty in what that little girl said. Her understanding is there is something in the world now that she created that doesn't have all of her capabilities, but has some additional capabilities, but it's not her. It's something she created. And
that's kind of semi-autonomous, right?
Well, that's going to be a big philosophical debate, because I just don't see it that way. But the bad actor thing is something that definitely, you know, somebody who creates an image of you that you don't create is now an interesting figure.
Yeah, I think that what Jim was getting at least from my perspective, is it's an expression of intention.
Sure.
I want to be, you know, go ahead and make as many copies of me as you'd like, because it's my intention for me and my persona to be an open source object, right, for people to use, versus I'm going to be over here on this side and I'm going to apply as much intellectual property law as I can to only have the expressions that I authorize, right, to manifest in the world, right? In between, there's a lot of, is it Creative Commons? Is it, whatever? But the fact is, it's either do as you please, come to the concert, make as much recording as you want, and then you can use it and, use it in your recording and sample it and do whatever you want. Or, right, hey, you got to buy, if you come in here and buy a ticket, you better put your phone away, all right, and you better buy the album, all right, at the door when you leave. So.
But the only reason we can say that is consensus. In other words, you can't tell me what to do for recording you and using it. I can do anything that I want. The consensus is we'll punish you if you don't do the things that we want you to do. And if you don't do it in the way that we want you to do. Data does not belong to anybody inherently. There's no such thing as my data. It's data. It may be about me, but it's data. The only way it becomes my data and there's ownership is by societal consensus. And
okay, I'm going to say that's not true, Mark. The reason that I can make that statement is if I write it down and I choose not to ever show it to anyone else, it belongs to me and me exclusively, right? Because I didn't share it with you.
Nope. It's just data in the world. It's data that is hard to find, but it's data in the world. And if Superman was there with X-ray vision, he would find it. And when we get more advanced technology, we find more and more data.
Okay, so if I write a poem in my mind and I don't write it down, are you going to come and try it open my head?
We haven't been able to access that data yet, but you've seen all the things that we now can look into your head and see what you're thinking. So think about 20 years from now, we will be able to do that. So then the question is, whatever's going on in your brain that makes you say, I think, which is a whole, everything in your brain coming together to say, I think, that have an opinion, that stuff is going to be findable.
Okay.
Well,
that's an interesting
let me ask,
opinion, but
it is. But I want to. Can I tweak back?
Go, Mike.
Click back a little bit back to Jim. Jim, I started to say is the young lady you were talking about showing this recognition that I was able to create this version of me, a digital twin, that can do something that I cannot. Do you think I have a second point of this that pulling from a real life of experience of about 5 minutes ago, but Jim, did she convey the sense that that twin was kind of under her control, semi-autonomous, or I was just curious if that ever came up. I'll have to go look in the link when I get a chance.
Yeah, it was her father describing what she said. It wasn't actually her talking in the video. There were clips that he played of her, but he kind of showed an architectural diagram with the tools that she used. And by the way, several of the tools were startup companies of Andreessen Horowitz. So it was a little bit of an ad for his startup companies.
What a surprise.
What a surprise. Shocking. But and then it had the beautiful Disney kind of version of his daughter. He actually had a picture of his daughter, which is, I imagine, why he doesn't want to share that slide. And I didn't take a picture of it, obviously.
Yeah.
But it was really, really interesting. And obviously he was quite proud of it. And but he did describe this kind of, this is a big wave that's coming. This is, and if
absolutely.
You look at, I did put a link to part of his deck that I was able to find in the chat above. So let me recopy that in case you guys want to take a closer look.
Did she choose to have the avatar look like her? That digital twin?
It sort of looked like her, but you know how Disney makes everything look really round, smooth, and big, and it was like that.
I'm just curious as to what aspiration she was representing in the visual of the avatar.
Yeah, I copied this whole thing and repaste it because I don't think Mark saw it. I don't know. I mean, I just put in earlier. I put in a paper called by Clark on depictions, and Mark, this may be something you want to read. I understand where you're going, that don't think of you and your digital twin is separate. They're together. I understand the direction you want to go. I just think there's, to me, there's physics at the bottom of everything, and that's energy.
Right.
And so it takes energy to run these digital twins, and that's going to be the limiting factor, is the energy required to run the digital twin, and there's energy required to run my physical body. So and somebody writes a story and puts it in a book, there's energy associated with everything. Every depiction of me has energy associated with it.
Sure.
And I don't have control. I mean, I like to think I have control of me and my body, but after 2 beers at a bar and somebody asked me a question, I look back at what I said and I wonder, did I really have enough control of myself there? I guess I didn't. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Physics. No, Jim, I want to say, going for that, you were talking about energy, and this was my real life example from the last 10 minutes. Energy within that, are you saying, would you include connectivity, right, as part under that, or is energy separate from connectivity?
No, connectivity is very, very important. Where I imagine it's going, let me show you where I imagine it's going. It's in the deck that I just shared with you. This is the talk I gave them yesterday. But this is, where is it gonna go? Okay, yeah, this is the slide that I'm kind of proud of, I guess. This is Moore's law. This is the Sporer version of Moore's law. It's estimating knowledge worker productivity. The cost, these diagonals that are going down left to right, this is the cost of computation. Our human brain is an exascale, and you can see we conceivably gets to an exascale at $1,000, which means we have to figure out how to do an exascale at much less energy than current systems. That's the point of some of the other slides in this deck, is to show, this is like 13 megawatts to get a fraction of an exascale. and our human brain, of course, is much 20 watts. So that's why it comes down to physics and energy, ultimately, what we can do with AI and all this kind of fun technologies.
I mean, there was just recently about every time you ask a question, all right, AI is taking a drink of water. It's usually surface or groundwater, but to cool the system, it's taking energy and it's consuming something that otherwise would have gone into a human mouth or agriculture. And that competition is about to become very real.
Exactly.
Yeah, the cost of these large language models is as much, 50% of it is the energy cost. And so, like, if you do it, this is going to be the challenge. Like in China, where they're using coal energy, in India, versus, are we doing it with sustainable energy is the other issue. That's going to be the challenge. So, of course, I'm going to have to go, but this is fantastic presentation.
I'm late for a meeting. I've got to go. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, so much.
I can send you anything you want in the presentation later. Bye. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Nice, Jim. Does anybody think that the cost, this energy cost of computing won't come down dramatically like it did with 10, billions of years of evolution? The fact that we do this with a watt, what they do with a zettawatt is just a function of time and evolution.
Mark, and I'm speaking outside of my space for a moment. Okay, this is not my thing, but I think a lot of the future generations of computing systems are going to have to be chilled a lot more than the current generations of computing systems. So basically frozen to do the quantum, and that cost might actually go up more than come down. Because not only are you running the technology, but you've got to run it in a much colder environment than.
Which means you got to expend a lot of energy to maintain that low temperature.
With all due respect, Matt, that sounds like the kinds of predictions that people have made in the past, that they said this will never happen because, and so I know we could go back and find lots of those, right? and what happens is something else breaks through at a different level that says, no, you don't need to do that.
But I mean, what Mac's talking about is just straight up physics. You can't run those chips that they're now using. I think, Doug, I've seen pictures that one. It's like 10 inches diagonal, right? The AI
physics
chips
with biology, then it becomes different. If the computing is DNA and not just anything else, then it becomes different. And that's what nature did. And so that is, I guess that's the way I'm looking at it. I'm saying, sure, there's the physics we know and the path we are on, and within that path there may be limitations that Mac is justified in saying. But the whole history of everything, physics, people, development, evolution, everything is moving to a newer and newer and newer.
Well, right. And that's why people keep falling for, room temperature fission. That was because I get you, that over the millennia, possibly there are genetic mutations where computational capabilities come from machines and somehow get into our DNA. That's sure. But in the interim, that disconnect that Mac identifies that's just straight up physics. There literally is no way. It'll be hard for us to get to that point if we don't find a very efficient way to manage the operation of these data centers, because as Doug points out, these things can just as more and more people use the tools, and Kevin points out that they've already discovered the issue, the challenge around getting enough water to cool these things is going to be very real. And keep an eye on what happens to any of those data centers that are along the Colorado River, around the Colorado River Basin, because that'll be one of the areas that will be affected in the next couple of years. Is those may likely be ones that the government decides to shut down unless they're government owned. Is a lot of those.
And Mike and Mark, this, to take a third point, this is going back to the conversation we had on Thomas Kuhn and scientific revolution, is that the paradigm is to continue to cool these things in a linear fashion, right?
Right.
But Mark, what would be necessary is for someone to completely change the paradigm and say, you're not going to have to go there, because if you did it this way. But I think this way has to be on an accelerated growth curve so that it fits the trajectory of the current technology, as opposed to kind of starting at scratch and then trying to catch up.
Right.
Well, I agree with everything you said, and I'm glad you're interpreting Kuhn that way, because that's how I interpret Kuhn. And my point is just that when Mike is using the word it's just physics, my way of saying that it's just the paradigm of physics that we are using at the moment, and that's it. Physics goes way beyond that into many other realms and the whole universe. And the universe does different things. It created a human brain that operates on a lot of energy. So that's a different paradigm that it created, and we are on another paradigm, which is all we can do now, because that's what we've invented. But it's not the only paradigm in the world. It won't ever be.
So we're going to stop at that point because we are in overtime. I want to thank you for the robust discussion today. Mike, do you have any closing comments as we wrap up? No, great session. But I did get a couple links to go follow from Jim and Doug. So some more good homework to do. We went done. From talking to machines to interaction to metaphysics. I like it. All right. So all the best, be intentional, and we'll talk to you next week. Cheers. See ya.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
You bet.